Ever since I was a child, I've loved to climb trees, play in trees, even build houses in them.
Me too. I think there's some intimate connection between humans and trees. Maybe because many years ago, before we evolved, we lived in them. I'm Barbara Damrosch.
And I'm Elliot Coleman. Stay with us for the next half hour, and we'll give you tips on choosing trees for your yard.
On Gardening Naturally.
Trees take a long time to grow, and that's why we're fortunate that this wonderful old maple decided to seed itself here some 70 or more years ago so we can enjoy it today. And because of that, we take very good care of it. When we cleared the land around here, we made sure that none of the trees fell on it to hurt it, that none of the machinery that might be by could bump into it, or that none of the machinery could even park near it, which would have compacted the soil and been hard on its roots. And because we had cut away the trees around it that were protecting it from windstorms, we cut off some large, almost dead trunks that would have overbalanced it out in that direction and made it susceptible to blowing down. We wanted to keep it here because we like it and do everything we can to protect it.
Meanwhile, though, we've planted a replacement tree. This is a linden, and we hope that it'll be around for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren to enjoy, even after the old maple is gone.
In fact, one of the nice things about trees is they connect past generations and future generations. I know families have a tradition of planting a tree every time one of their children is born.
Well, that's a nice idea,
Yeah,
isn't
it really is.
But just because planting a tree is such a long-term commitment, you have to really think about it before you do it. You need to choose a tree that's just right for your climate so it will thrive, and you also have to pick the right spot. You want to have a spot where the tree can grow as tall as it needs to grow and as wide without creating any problems.
And the best way to learn all of that is to visit some place near you where there are full-size specimens of the trees in which you're interested so you can see them in all their glory.
I did my tree research at one of the best tree collections I've ever seen, and in a very surprising place. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts with Gary Kohler. And Gary Kohler is the chief horticulturalist at the Arnold Arboretum. But right now, we're at Mount Auburn Cemetery, where Gary's going to show me something about trees.
Yeah, it's a beautiful day to be here, and look at the lovely scene we see with the dogwoods, the white dogwood and the pink dogwood, which are native to eastern New England. You have the rhododendron carolinianum, the Carolina rhododendron in the pink form, and up here in the white form. And underneath you have Spanish squills, which is a European bulb, but it completes a picture and kind of a composition in the landscape.
Yes, especially with several natives being used together. I always like to see that.
Well, as we walk up here to the dogwood, do you think you know what the real flower is?
Well, I know that this pink part is not the flower.
Correct. Most people think the pink part is. It's actually a modified leaf called a bract, and in the middle is actually a cluster of flowers that looks like a small bouquet, which is in full flower now. And the pink part is actually to attract the pollinating insect. Later on, after it's been pollinated, the flowers will fall away, and you'll get a fruit, which is red, points skyward, and the birds, as they fly by, can see it.
Excellent planning by nature.
It is.
Gary, when they planted those dogwoods, do you suppose they knew how beautiful they were going to look with the backdrop of that copper beech tree?
Well, the copper beech was probably in the range of 50 to 75 years old when the dogwoods were planted, and the dogwoods are now probably 50 years old, so they probably had an idea of the color composition that they were making.
So, Gary, how long ago was the cemetery created?
Well, it was started in 1831, and it was started as the place by the Massachusetts Horticultural Society where you would bury the dead, and it would be a peaceful setting, but it would also be an equally peaceful setting for the living to come and communicate with their friends and their loved ones who are gone. And it was so successful as a garden cemetery that it led to the development of the rural cemetery movement, and that was so successful that out of this came the American park system.
Well, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and the park system was largely after the Civil War.
Yeah. How big is the cemetery?
I believe it's about 175 acres. It's a very big place. It takes a while to walk around.
Well, let's get started.
Okay.
It's distressing to hear about all of the problems we've been having with dogwoods lately.
Yeah, they have a disease called dogwood decline, which is a very common disease in the environment, recently more severe. But there have been breeding work trying to overcome this. They're breeding the Chinese or Kusa dogwood against our native dogwood, and there's about 6 or 8 hybrids that are coming along now that seem to have the resistance that we're looking for.
Well, that's great news.
It is.
Are there some other trees that are similar that bloom at the same time we could substitute?
Well, there's a tree called the Carolina silverbell, which comes from the Smoky Mountains. And it's a larger tree. It's a more upright tree. It has small bell-shaped flowers that hang down, much smaller than on the dogwood, and has a lovely yellow autumn color. And it has a different niche, but it's a nice small tree for home landscapes.
Yes, more people should try it.
Yeah, they should. And then if you're looking for a tree that's a little bit larger, blooms a little bit later, blooming in early June here in Massachusetts. If you look across to the yellowwood tree, Cladrastis, it's a tree that has long hanging white flowers like a wisteria. They're white, they're lightly fragrant, and they bloom reliably about, well, every 3rd year. And lightly in between.
Well, the other nice thing about this tree, just looking at it, I can tell that it casts a nice dappled shade.
It's a very dappled shade, and if you look at it, it's a nice gray bark, just like the beech tree. And it's open. Grass grows very well around the base of the tree.
Or little flowering plants that like partial shade.
Like little woodland plants.
Yes, I'm always looking for trees to grow those under. I'll remember that one.
It's a great tree.
We've settled ourselves on a little bench at the head of a very tranquil pond. It's ringed with some very nice trees, a lot of them those small and mid-sized trees we were talking about.
That's right. Here we have a nice wetland situation if you look at this beautiful pond. And a lot of the plants right along the edge are wetland species. Now, people forget that plants grow in upland situations and downland or wetland situations. And here we have, along the left side of the pond, the tree that's not quite leafed out, a bald cypress. And it's a plant from Georgia, northern Florida, grows in the bald cypress swamps. And it grows perfectly well here in Massachusetts.
I see it's even developed some of those famous cypress knees.
Correct. The knees, we don't really know what they do. Some people think they have to do with the respiration of the plant, the oxygen exchange. Other people think they have to do with the propping of the tree in the wetland situation.
Interesting.
Yeah, and if you grow it in a drier soil, that it doesn't get the knees.
I see.
Then if you come around the pond, the plant that has a little crook in the neck on the far side of the pond is Nyssa sylvatica, which is beetle bung, tupelo, pepperidge or black gum. Pepperidge Farm name comes from this. And it's a wetland plant. And of all the plants we grow here in New England, it's one of the most brilliant in the autumn landscape. It turns a beautiful scarlet. Have you seen it in Maine? It's probably in Maine.
It may be. It's beautiful right there, isn't it? Leaning into the pond.
Yeah,
like
it has a beautiful architecture to it. And then when you come around a little bit further, you have a swamp magnolia or sweet bay magnolia, which is interesting from a geographical standpoint because it goes all the way from Maine. The town of Magnolia, Massachusetts is named in honor of this tree, and it goes south to the Everglades of Florida. So it would occur in the swamps of the Everglades as well.
Is it a typical magnolia flower?
Well, the flowers come out after the leaves come out, and it's a white flower. It's about the size of a 50-cent piece. It's very fragrant, and it blooms here in Massachusetts in early June. Very pretty.
Great. Perfect one for a small yard.
It's very perfect.
You know, I love looking at these trees before a lot of the leaves have come out because you can see the structure, the architecture of the tree. It's fun to look at them in the dead of winter, too, for the same reason.
It is. Some trees are very sculptural. If you look at the tree at the far end of the pond behind the rhododendron, you'll see a Kentucky coffee tree, which is native from, say, Pennsylvania south into the Carolinas. And it's a tree that a lot of people in the past haven't admired very much because they called it gaunt or kind of gnarled in the wintertime. I look at it as sculptural and architectural.
Well, it does have an interesting silhouette that's very different from the ones around it.
Yeah, and the leaves are just coming out now, and with all its friends, all the baby leaves coming out in shades of pinks and yellows and oranges, and there's such a translucency to the leaves that it's really beautiful to look at them now.
Now, that Rose Bay rhododendron that's right under it, that's really a tree-like rhododendron.
Correct.
It's so tall.
Correct.
But it seems to like the pond, too.
Well, it'll tolerate the soils that are beginning to get a little bit more wet. Not wet, but merging to being wet. And it's one of the larger rhododendrons we can grow. It'll get up to 20 feet or even more where it's really well grown and happy.
Here's another tree that hasn't quite leafed out yet. That's one of my favorites, the sassafras.
Yeah, it's just in full flower right now. The leaves haven't started coming out yet, but...
Well, when they do, they'll have that wonderful mitten shape.
Correct. It's an interesting tree to show children because some of the mittens will just be an oval leaf. Some of them will have one thumb, and some of them will have two thumbs, a typical mitten shape. So it's kind of architecturally interesting from a leaf standpoint. And then in the fall, the sassafras is beautiful because they'll turn oranges and yellows and golds, depending on the sunlight that they have.
Well, another thing I liked about that tree when I was a kid was I'd take some root and I boiled it in water to see if I could make sassafras tea, and it actually tasted like root beer.
So you invited all your friends over for sassafras tea?
Yes, all of them.
I bet they had a good time.
The other thing I like about the sassafras is that it's a good butterfly plant.
Oh, really?
Now, the spice bush swallowtail is named because it likes the spice bush as a larval food for the caterpillars, but it actually prefers sassafras.
Oh, interesting. You know, we sometimes forget about these animal-plant interactions in the garden that happen just as well in the garden as in the wild.
Right. That's absolutely true. In fact, by planting some of these wildlife plants, we can help the wildlife to survive. Gary, here's another tree that really makes me feel at home. Maine is the pine tree state, and it was named after the white pine.
Well, the white pine is one of the magnificent conifers of New England, and when the original settlers came here, it was one of the tallest, straightest evergreens in the forest, and in fact, they cut the long, tall trees as masts for the ships of the British Navy, so they collected all the biggest trees out of the forest. But we still have all these beautiful ones. They're very common up and down the East Coast. They grow to big size, 80, 100, 120 feet tall.
And they grow quickly, too.
They grow very quickly, and they're available in most nurseries. So it's a very common tree and very widely distributed. So could I take you and show you one of the rare trees of our garden heritage here in New England?
Oh, I'd love to see
show you that. And here's the Franklinia.
Oh. Well, it's behind everybody else here and leafing out, isn't it?
I think it's kind of cold.
Yeah. But it's got a very nice winter shape, and I'm crazy about the striped bark.
Yeah, the bark's beautiful, nice year-round quality. It has an interesting history. This was first found by a plant explorer named John Bartram, and he went from his Philadelphia garden to Georgia, when Georgia was a very wild place. And he found this growing in the wild along a river. He brought it back to his Philadelphia garden. He named it, since it was a new plant, in honor of his friend, Benjamin Franklin. So the name is Franklinia, commemorating his friend's name. And it's never been found in the wild since the mid-1700s. And the only plants that survive today are those which come from his Philadelphia garden.
How about that? Does it flower late, too?
Flowers beginning in probably late August or early September, and it has a large single white flower with a tuft of stamens in the middle. It looks much like a camellia flower. And what's spectacular about this is it will be in flower when the autumn color, which is a purple or bronze color, comes out.
Sounds wonderful.
It's really nice. Let me show you another tree, which is a carpinus.
Okay. Yeah, this is another of our native woodland trees.
Yeah.
The common names are hornbeam and ironwood because the wood is so hard if you've ever had to try to chop it.
Yeah, the wood, when the tree gets older, this is a fairly young tree, but when it gets older, the wood gets flattened and it's kind of muscular looking, like muscles running through flesh. It's very, very...
Picturesque.
Very picturesque.
Yeah.
And then in the autumn, this will take on kind of a nice amber autumn color before the leaves fall away. In Europe, there's another species of this, Carpinus betula. It's a European hornbeam, which they use very commonly. They clip it into hedges. So if you go to places like Germany or Austria, you'll find lots of clipped hedges made out of hornbeam. And if you go to Dunbarton Oaks in Washington, D.C., you will find an ellipse, a very formal clipped ellipse made out of this particular tree.
That sounds beautiful, but I think if I had this tree, I'd want to leave it just in its lovely natural shape.
Just as it is.
Gary, I've seen many fine trees here today, but it's pretty hard to beat the shape of that European beech behind us.
It's beautiful, isn't it? the shape and the silhouette and the size of it.
It's so perfect. That lovely gray bark.
Yeah, and the light passing through the leaves. It's very delicate right now.
It's the ultimate grand old tree. But it isn't even that old, is it?
No, it's probably about 40 to 50 years old. At this time, it stands about, I would say, probably 40 feet tall, and it spreads 40 feet across. You know, when that's a mature tree, that'll probably reach 60 to 80 feet tall and probably 60 to 80 feet across. So it takes an enormous amount of space.
Yeah, you really would have to be very careful to allot enough room for that tree.
Yes.
Because it would be a shame to have to cut it back in any way and spoil that perfect shape.
Well, see, when people plant a tree, most people don't take enough time to think about where they're going to put it in their yard, and most people plunk it right in the middle of their lawn. So they need to think, I would go out with a stake and put it in and measure back again from the stake to see if you're going to have enough room when it gets big. And most of us aren't going to live long enough to see it big, but somebody will.
Somebody will.
Yeah, and I call them heritage trees. We're planting them for tomorrow and the next generation, and we need to do that so that they will be there for the other people.
That's right. Another nice thing about this is the way those branches come all the way down to the ground.
Correct.
And those roots are so close to the surface, some of them may even emerge.
Yeah.
So nothing else is going to grow under that tree.
No, and some trees you probably don't need to have anything grow underneath, because if you know the great English landscape tradition, they have these broad, beautiful lawns with a few carefully placed trees in the lawn. And the trees were kind of big objects in space, and there was space in between them, and it was magnificent.
This tree is really a landscape in itself.
It is. It is. It's wonderful.
This has been a perfect place to look at trees. What are some other garden cemeteries across America that people could see?
Well, there are many, and I suspect almost every city has one, but a few that I could come to mind immediately are in Cincinnati, Ohio. There's a wonderful place called Spring Grove Cemetery. Louisville, Kentucky, there's a place called Cave Hill Cemetery. And if you go all the way across the country, you'll go to Forest Lawn in California.
That's very famous.
It's very famous.
I expect that wherever you live, you could probably contact your local extension service or Land Grant University
or the Botanical Garden,
and they could point you to some. Well, thank you for the tour, and maybe I'll go back to Maine and see what kind of cemeteries I can find there.
I hope there's some beautiful ones. I'm sure there are.
Thank you, Gary.
I expect people's first association with trees is the idea of the joy of sitting in their shade. And the second thing they associate is the work of raking leaves. Well, I want to tell you there's a joy factor here, too. I really like this work, and once I'm finished, I can have the joy of jumping into a pile of leaves. But best of all is what I can make from these leaves, leaf mold. And all I have to do is move them from here to an enclosed pile and let them sit 2 or 3 years, and I get a product that looks just like finished compost, and it's an excellent fertilizer for spreading on the yard to grow grass and to grow the trees. But to get them from here to the pile, I need a system. And I used to rake them onto a big tarp and drag them over, but then I had to lift them up into the leaf mold bin. So what I did was recycle an old grain bag into a leaf scoop. And I just took a couple of old pieces of wood and nailed them around the edge there so it'll hold it in. And now I can take a big armload of leaves with my leaf scoop and carry them anywhere in the yard I want, or dump them into a wheelbarrow. A recycled tool and recycled leaves. What could be better than that?
A new tree, it's often a good idea to stake it so that it doesn't tilt in the wind or even blow out of the ground, especially if it's a bare root tree like this young peach, which we planted last year. All we did was drive a tomato stake in next to the tree and then anchored it with some soft green plastic ribbon we got at the local feed store that won't cut into the trunk. Now, in the old days, they would have put a stake on either side and wired it in really tightly. But they found that a tree needs a little play in the wind to develop a strong, healthy, tapered trunk. So this is just about right. Now let me show you what we do with a larger tree. Often a bald and burlap tree doesn't need to be staked. Maybe a big maple about 15 feet tall with a great leafy head, I might stake that. This little crabapple, I might not, unless it were on a very windy, exposed location like the top of the hill. And this is how I do it. Now you can see that I've already started. I've got 2 stakes in, about 2 feet out, and I'm going to put a third. In this case, I've taken some tomato stakes about 2 feet long. With a bigger tree, they'd be sturdier stakes and further out from the tree. And all I'm going to do is hammer that in with a dead blow mallet. There, that should do it. Okay, I'm going to take a piece of wire like this and thread it through a section of old hose, rubber hose. I'm going to loop it around the trunk with some branches anchoring it and twist that to hold it in place. And I'm going to take it down, wrap it around my little peg, twist it. Okay, now that still has some play. After a few years, as the roots of this tree spread out and anchor the tree, I'll remove these. As the branches and trunk grow, they could really be constrained by these or even girdled, so I'll take them off. Besides, this tree will look a lot prettier without them. You don't need to give up on a tree, even though it's old and dead like this one. We left it standing as part of the garden picture.
That's right. Trees in the natural world don't stop being useful just because they're crumbling. This one, for example, is providing homes for birds and squirrels and habitat for all sorts of insects.
Plus, I just think it's more real to see a dead tree in your yard. Consider leaving a few in yours, too.
And on that thought, goodbye and good gardening.
Next on TLC, doing something for your home can be easy, even fun. Check and see here on Homebodies. Then, add value to your home with some serious improvements. The Home Pro shows you how.